Your brother's the smart one. You're meant to support, not lead. Those words didn't just echo in my ears, they carved themselves into the polished mahogany of the boardroom table, etched in every gaze that turned politely away. My father's voice was calm, even casual, as he made the announcement that would alter the course of my life. Nathan will be taking over Bright Fern Holdings and inheriting the $50 million trust fund Eleanor established, he said, not even sparing me a glance. The room was filled with tailored suits and restrained nods, every board member complicit in a future they assumed was inevitable. Nathan smiled, already accepting congratulations, while I Juliet Whitmore, the older sibling. The invisible architect behind this company's stability sat frozen. My heart pounded so loudly I almost missed the soft scratch of the court reporter's pen. It wasn't just the insult. I had endured those my entire life. It was the finality, the erasure. She continue in her supportive role, Dad added. Juliet's always been good with details, I clapped, mechanically, hollow. Around the table, no one met my eyes. But then, just as Nathan launched into his grand vision, all sweeping gestures and shallow ideas, I noticed a flicker in the back corner. A familiar face, Victoria Collins, and she was holding a document. Something inside me shifted. The humiliation was sharp. But the silence that followed, it felt like a storm building, not settling. I didn't know it yet, but that moment wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. I was 7 when I first realized I lived in my brother's shadow. It was a Sunday morning, and we were gathered around the breakfast table in our grand family kitchen. My mother had just served Nathan a stack of chocolate chip pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. I had asked for the same, but got a stern, "You're too old for that now, Juliet," from Dad. I was 8 months older than Nathan. That was it. Nathan laughed. That easy, charming laugh that always made adults smile, and I remember feeling small in a room that had once felt like home. Growing up in the Whitmore household meant perfection wasn't praised, it was expected. For Nathan, mediocrity was celebrated as brilliance. For me, excellence was dismissed as duty. Our mother, Patricia, had been the buffer. She saw me, celebrated the way I built entire cities out of Lego blocks while Nathan got bored halfway through building a tower. She noticed when I helped reorganize the pantry by category and expiration date. She praised me for thinking, for planning, for seeing what others missed. But when I was 15, she died. A sudden aneurysm. One moment we were arguing over whether I could go to a co-ed sleepover, and the next I was standing in the hallway outside her hospital room, holding my sobbing little brother's hand. After that, Dad took over everything at home and at Bright Fern Holdings. And with Mom gone, so was the only voice that balanced the scales. Dad wasn't a cruel man, not overtly. But his beliefs were forged in a different era. To him, sons were heirs, daughters were support systems. He never said it outright, but every decision, every nod of approval toward Nathan, every glance of impatience at me, made it clear. Nathan was the future. I was the framework. He got the tutors, the golf lessons, the investor luncheons. I got the spreadsheets, the chores, the expectation to smile and help. I was the one who read Dad's financial magazines, not Nathan. I was the one who asked questions about compound interest and market volatility. Nathan thought NASDAQ was a type of energy drink until he was 21. And yet, every time he showed the slightest interest in business, Dad lit up like Nathan had just invented capitalism. By high school, I had learned to hide my ambitions. Praise made Nathan smug. Questions made Dad sigh. So I kept my head down and studied economics, statistics, organizational psychology. I got a perfect CIT score. Dad blinked and said, "Good. Maybe you can help Nathan with his applications." I got into Stanford's business program. Nathan barely got into a state school, and only because Dad made a donation that would have funded a science wing. At Stanford, I thrived. I interned at Fortune 500 companies. I led student investment groups. I graduated summa cum laude with job offers from 3 of the Big 4 firms. Dad told me to come home. "Nathan needs you at Bright Fern. You're good at the details." I was 24. My dreams were Manhattan, Hong Kong, IPOs, and billion-dollar negotiations. But I went home. For 8 years, I buried those dreams under logistics, HR reports, and financial restructuring plans. I made Bright Fern efficient, lean, scalable, profitable. Nathan was promoted 3 times in that span. I never got a title change. I was simply Juliet, the one who solved problems. The one who made everything work. The one no one saw. And yet, I loved the company. I loved the strategy, the intricacies of business. I loved watching our numbers climb quarter after quarter. I loved creating systems that outlived individual decisions. Sometimes I told myself that was enough. That being the unseen force behind success still counted for something, until that boardroom meeting proved otherwise. My first title at Bright Fern Holdings was Special Assistant to the Executive Office. It sounded important. It wasn't. My job was a patchwork of everything no one else wanted to do, organizing supply closets, proofreading PowerPoint slides, and scheduling Nathan's networking breakfasts with men who had no intention of doing business with us, but liked feeling important for an hour. Still, I showed up every morning at 7:30 sharp, first in, last out. I listened, watched, and learned. I didn't resent the grunt work, not at first. I treated it like reconnaissance. If I was going to run this company someday, silently of course, I needed to know how every cog turned. So I rotated through departments, quietly, methodically. In HR, I overhauled our onboarding process, cutting turnover by 18% in 1 year. In procurement, I found redundancies in vendor contracts that saved us $1.4 million. In operations, I implemented a workflow tracking system that improved delivery efficiency by 22%. But these changes weren't announced in board meetings. Nathan got the credit every single time. Dad praised him for the new initiatives and strategic thinking. Nathan smiled and nodded, sometimes glancing at me with something between guilt and amusement. But I wasn't doing it for recognition, not yet. I was building something. Call it leverage, call it credibility, call it insurance against a system designed to ignore me. My real break came during the Henderson crisis. Nathan had landed the Henderson Group with a grand presentation full of buzzwords and vague timelines. Everyone clapped. Then he promised a deliverable in 3 weeks that should have taken 6. 2 weeks in, Henderson's coup called to cancel. We were hemorrhaging credibility. I stayed at the office for 9 straight days. I redesigned the product outline, rewrote the analytics framework, and hand-delivered an early demo that salvaged the deal. Dad called Nathan a hero. Great leadership under pressure. Nathan took me out to lunch that day. "You saved my ass," he said, laughing over a plate of salmon tartare. "Seriously." "I owe you." I smiled, but something inside me cracked. "You don't owe me. You owe the truth," but I didn't say it. I just nodded and drank my water. Then came Phoenix. Nathan's idea. Launch a new office in the Southwest with no research, no infrastructure, and no plan. Within 6 months, we were bleeding cash. Rent, staffing, logistics disaster. I flew out on a red-eye, fired half the staff, renegotiated the lease, and implemented a hybrid client model that stabilized revenue. Profit returned in 3 months. Nathan presented the turnaround strategy at the annual retreat. Dad called him a rising star. The pattern repeated. Nathan broke things. I fixed them. He basked in the spotlight. I disappeared backstage. But behind the scenes, people noticed. Employees came to me with problems, not Nathan. Junior managers asked me for mentorship. Vendors emailed me directly, saying they trusted my judgment. I started keeping a record: memos, emails, success metrics, timestamp spreadsheets, quiet documentation of truth. And then, one Thursday morning, Grandmother Eleanor came in unannounced. She asked to tour the departments. She spent 6 hours talking to people assistants, engineers, analysts. And every single one of them directed her to me. That night, she called me into her hotel suite. "You know this company better than anyone, Juliet." I blinked. "Your father sees titles. I see performance. Don't let them make you small." I didn't know it then, but she had already begun the process of rewriting her will. The ladder I had been climbing in the dark for 8 years was about to end. And I was going to step into the light. Nathan had always been the golden child, even before he could spell the word business. From the outside, he looked every bit the heir. Tall, charming, well-dressed in a way that implied effortless wealth. He smiled often and broadly, not because he was particularly happy, but because he knew it was disarming. People liked Nathan instantly, irrationally. Dad often said Nathan just had it. No one could define what it was, but everyone agreed he had it in spades. Charisma, presence, a kind of magnetic audacity that made you want to believe in him, even when the facts said otherwise. By the time Nathan was in college, he already had a corner office waiting. Never mind that he barely passed his classes, or that his professors routinely emailed Dad about missed deadlines. Nathan had the last name, and that was enough. His first project at Bright Fern was a marketing campaign for a new consulting division. He spent half the budget on a flashy event at a golf resort and hired his college friends to design the pitch deck. It flopped, but somehow the blame fell on the creative team. Nathan remained untouchable. Dad chalked it up to early learning curves. I called it what it was, incompetence wrapped in privilege, but I stayed silent as always. Nathan didn't just fail upward, he floated. Every setback was reframed as a bold risk, every screw-up a growth opportunity. And with each passing year, Dad's praise grew louder, more public. "We need more vision like Nathan's," he'd say in meetings.
He thinks like an entrepreneur. Meanwhile, I was literally keeping the company solvent.
At first, Nathan and I were civil. We had the unspoken sibling truce. He played the part, and I cleaned up the messes. But as he climbed the ranks, something shifted. He started treating me like staff.
He'd call me into meetings late, expecting me to take notes.
He'd assign me follow-up tasks that weren't mine. He'd make decisions without consulting me, and when they backfired, he'd say, "Juliet, can you fix this real quick?" I fixed everything, and I documented everything. When we acquired Westditch Partners, Nathan promised shareholders a 25% increase in revenue within the first year. Bold, inspiring, wrong. He hadn't read the due diligence report. Didn't notice the internal lawsuit over IP rights. Didn't anticipate the resignation of their top 3 engineers. I negotiated the legal settlement. I onboarded a new CTO. I restructured their entire product roadmap. At the annual shareholder meeting, Dad introduced Nathan as the strategic genius behind the acquisition. I stood at the side of the stage holding the revised projections. Nathan didn't thank me, not even once. The more praise he received, the more detached from reality he became. He made sweeping proclamations about AI integration, international expansion, and disrupting the consulting model. None of it grounded. None of it feasible. But Dad beamed.
"He has vision," he'd say. I wanted to scream.
Vision without execution is delusion. The board started to notice, quietly. You could see it in their raised eyebrows. Their sideways glances when Nathan announced another ambitious initiative with no budget or roadmap. They never challenged him publicly. No one wanted to be the one to question Richard Whitmore's son. But then grandmother Eleanor started asking questions. She'd call me after presentations. Ask about Nathan's metrics, about the cost-benefit analyses he never mentioned. "He's enthusiastic," I'd say diplomatically. "But is he competent?" she'd press. I never answered. I didn't need to. In the months leading up to her death, she grew quieter around Nathan, more direct with me. "You've been protecting him," she said once over tea. "Someone had to," I replied. "No," she said, looking me dead in the eye. "Someone had to protect the company from him." That was the first time I realized she might be thinking about succession. Still, I didn't dare hope. Nathan was the golden child, untouchable. I was the fixer, the quiet one, the support system, but Eleanor wasn't just watching. She was weighing, measuring, calculating. Nathan's rise had seemed inevitable. Until the day it wasn't. Grandmother Eleanor was a force. Not loud, not flashy, but deliberate, commanding, and always 5 moves ahead. She wasn't the kind of woman you hugged without asking. She didn't coo over babies or bake cookies. Eleanor Whitmore built Bright Fern Holdings alongside my grandfather brick by brick, contract by contract before Richard Whitmore, her only son, ever set foot in a boardroom. To the world, she was the dignified matriarch. To us, she was the quiet storm no one dared cross. She wore pearls like armor, carried a notebook wherever she went, and asked questions that made executives sweat. Even in her late 70s, her mind was sharper than most analysts half her age. I grew up half in awe of her, half terrified, but I never doubted she saw me. While Dad talked strategy and Nathan talked vision, Eleanor talked numbers, outcomes, execution. When she asked a question, she expected a real answer. If you didn't have one, she didn't shame you. She simply remembered and made sure you weren't trusted again. In my early years at Bright Fern, Eleanor rarely intervened. She'd attend board meetings, smile politely at Nathan's presentations, and leave without comment. But after the Phoenix debacle, that changed. She showed up unannounced one morning, escorted by no one, clipboard in hand, and asked to sit in on every department's daily briefing. No one said no. She spent an entire week rotating through teams, asking everything from employee satisfaction to logistical workflow breakdowns. She asked the janitor what software we used for service requests. She asked the intern in HR how she felt onboarding had changed over the past 6 months. And she asked them who they trusted to solve problems. My name came up a lot. She said little at the time, a nod here, a slight smile there. But she began pulling me aside, short chats, targeted questions. What's your biggest concern about the Henderson contract extension? How much do you think we're overpaying for the fleet contract in logistics? What's the real reason retention improved in Q2? I answered honestly, not to impress her but because I respected her. One evening, as she prepared to leave after a full day of surprise interviews, she lingered outside the elevator. You have my mind, she said softly. I blinked. Your father has ambition. Nathan has charisma, but you see what matters. It was the closest she had ever come to praise. In the weeks that followed, I noticed her appearing more frequently, sitting in on budget reviews, attending product development updates, never interrupting, just watching, measuring. Dad assumed she was showing support. Nathan thought she was indulging nostalgia. I knew better. She was gathering data, observing reality, separating legacy from competency. One night, I found a handwritten note on my desk. No name, just a sentence in Eleanor's precise, italic script. Leadership is not inherited. It is demonstrated. It stayed with me. In December, she invited me to her home for tea, just the two of us. We talked for 3 hours. She asked about employee morale, digital infrastructure, vendor risk, and my views on long-term sustainability. Then she asked the question I hadn't dared imagine. If something were to happen to your father, what would you do? I paused. Stabilize, prioritize continuity, reassure our clients. Audit every department and optimize based on data, not politics, she smiled. Not warmly, but with something sharper like recognition. Good, she said. That's the right answer. When she passed away a few weeks later, I grieved the loss, but I also felt something deeper, a shift. I had no idea she had changed her will. But I knew, in my bones, that she had seen everything. And she hadn't been quiet out of indifference. She had been quiet because she was planning. The conference room was elegant in that cold, corporate way, mahogany paneling, abstract art, and bottled water that cost more per ounce than gasoline. It was the kind of room where decisions worth millions were made with expressions that never flinched. And it was the room where my future was stolen. I sat at the table with Nathan to my right and Dad at the head. My notepad lay open, but I wasn't writing. I already knew what was coming. I just didn't know how deeply it would cut. Dad stood, clearing his throat like he was about to deliver a eulogy. Thank you all for coming. Today is a momentous day for Bright Fern Holdings and for our family. I heard the words, but they didn't reach me. I was watching Nathan. He straightened in his chair, adjusting his tie, his jaw set with the certainty of someone already crowned. Effective immediately, Dad continued, Nathan will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer. He will also become the sole beneficiary of the $50 million trust fund Eleanor established for company succession. There it was. The sound in my ears vanished, replaced by a dull roar. I felt the blood drain from my face. Nathan has shown tremendous growth over the years, Dad continued. He's the kind of visionary this company needs. Juliet will remain in her current role, continuing her excellent work behind the scenes. He didn't look at me. Not once. The room filled with polite applause. Nathan beamed. A few board members offered him congratulatory handshakes. Some looked my way, eyes sliding quickly off mine, and I clapped. Because that's what I was supposed to do. My hands moved mechanically. Inside, I burned, every moment of sacrifice. Every night I stayed late. Every disaster I averted. All of it erased with a single announcement. The worst part? No one was surprised. Nathan launched into a speech, confident, polished, hollow. I plan to expand our market presence aggressively, he said. We're aiming to double workforce capacity and move into 3 new regional territories by Q4. I nearly choked. That plan was a fantasy, logistically impossible, fiscally irresponsible. We had data to prove it, but he kept talking. I looked around the room. Some board members nodded, others looked uncertain. But no one spoke up. Because he was Richard Whitmore's son. Because they thought they knew how this would end. Then I saw her. Victoria Collins. Standing quietly in the back of the room, file folder in hand. Eyes sharp. Expression unreadable. Something shifted in me. An instinct, a whisper that the story wasn't over. Dad wrapped up the meeting, gesturing to Nathan. We'll begin transitioning executive authority immediately. Juliet will support him as she always has. He smiled at me. Not kindly, not cruelly. Like a man dismissing a detail. Nathan reached over and squeezed my shoulder. I know I can count on you, sis. And that was it. I was dismissed, erased, applauded for my obedience. But as the room stirred and people began gathering their notes, Victoria cleared her throat. Before we adjourn, she said, there is one final matter that must be addressed. All motion stopped. Dad frowned. Victoria, can it wait? She shook her head. I'm afraid not. This concerns Eleanor Whitmore's trust and the succession of Bright Fern Holdings. Nathan froze. What are you talking about? The will was settled. Victoria stepped forward, calm and resolute. The will that was read 6 months ago was not Eleanor's final testament. The air left the room. I couldn't breathe. Victoria placed the folder on the table and opened it slowly. 3 weeks before her passing, Eleanor executed a codicil legally binding amendment to her will. She requested it remain sealed until the day the succession was formally announced. Dad's expression changed. Shock, confusion, fear. Nathan looked like he'd been slapped. What are you saying? He asked, his voice rising. I'm saying, Victoria replied, that Eleanor made a different choice. One informed by her personal observations, business evaluations, and independent consultations. She looked at me. And I knew exactly what she was about to say. Victoria turned the page. Eleanor Whitmore named Juliet Whitmore as the primary beneficiary of the $50 million trust fund and the designated successor to Bright Fern Holdings. Silence. Long, deafening silence. My hands trembled. My stomach turned. My mind screamed, but my heart, it beat steady. Like it had been waiting for this moment its entire life. Dad slumped into his chair. Nathan looked around the room, desperate for someone to object. No one did. And then, for the first time in that meeting, I sat up straighter. The storm had arrived. The room was silent. Not the kind of silence that follows confusion or disappointment, but the kind that hits just before the storm begins. The kind that makes your skin prickle with the instinct to run or fight. All eyes were on Victoria Collins as she unfolded the legal amendment. My father's expression had turned to stone, and Nathan looked like the ground beneath him had just caved in. Let me be clear, Victoria said. This codicil is fully notarized, witnessed, and filed. There is no ambiguity, she began to read. In recognition of demonstrated leadership, operational knowledge, and strategic foresight, I, Eleanor Whitmore, hereby name Juliet Whitmore as the sole beneficiary of my business trust and successor to executive authority in Bright Fern Holdings. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from embarrassment but something else. Validation. The words were plain, legal, devoid of drama, but to me they were thunder. Nathan tried to speak. This can't be right. That's not what she wanted. That's not. Victoria didn't flinch. There is video testimony. Signed affidavits. Medical confirmation of sound mental capacity. Eleanor anticipated resistance and made provisions to prevent this exact situation. Dad leaned forward, his voice brittle. You're telling me my mother disinherited her grandson without saying a word to me? She didn't disinherit anyone, Victoria said calmly. She simply changed the terms. Based on merit. I couldn't move. The woman who had quietly walked the halls. who asked questions no one thought mattered, who never raised her voice. She had turned the tide of everything after she was gone. Victoria turned another page. Mrs. Whitmore's reasoning is detailed here. She cites Juliet's handling of the Henderson crisis, her strategic restructure of the Phoenix expansion, her oversight of the Westage integration, and her mentorship of junior staff across all departments. Nathan was shaking his head. This is insane. She never said anything to me. Never mentioned she was reconsidering, because she didn't want behavior to change under observation, Victoria replied. She wanted to see authenticity, to observe who stepped up and who simply coasted on entitlement. That line hit hard, Victoria continued. Furthermore, Mrs. Whitmore reviewed financial records and independent evaluations. She also conducted anonymous interviews with key personnel. The conclusions were unanimous. Juliet Whitmore was already functioning as Brightfern's operational leader. A soft murmur rippled through the room. Board members shifted uncomfortably. They knew, they had seen it too. But until now, no one had dared say it aloud. Victoria looked directly at me. Eleanor intended for you to lead, Juliet. She made that intention unmistakably clear. I nodded, slowly. The weight of years fell off my shoulders like a coat I'd worn too long. Nathan exploded. This is a setup. You manipulated her. You played her.
No, I said. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need it to.
I didn't manipulate anyone. I just did the work. Dad stood, palms flat on the table. This isn't how things are done. Legacy matters. Family structure matters. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Legacy does matter. That's why Eleanor made this decision to protect it. Nathan turned to the board. You're really going to let this happen? She's going to ruin everything. But the board remained silent, not out of fear, not out of confusion, out of recognition. They'd known all along. They just never had the permission to admit it. Victoria closed the folder. As of this moment, Juliet Whitmore is the legal CEO of Brightfern Holdings, per Eleanor Whitmore's final directive. And like that, the room shifted. I wasn't just the girl in the background anymore. I was in charge. Victoria reopened the folder. This time, she pulled out a thick stack of papers neatly tabbed and highlighted. Every board member leaned forward instinctively. These are Eleanor's notes, she said. Her evaluations of both heirs. The room stilled again like the air itself was holding its breath. Each page was meticulous, handwritten, dated. The first was titled, Phoenix Expansion, Risk Analysis. It wasn't just a summary. It was a breakdown line by line of the damage Nathan's initiative had caused. Projected losses, actual losses, missed deadlines, staffing fallout. Then in Eleanor's scrawl, solution proposed by Juliet, effective, scalable, execution time, 3 weeks. Turnaround confirmed. Another page, Henderson Group contract crisis, bullet points listed Nathan's missteps. Unrealistic timelines. Client dissatisfaction, miscommunication. Beside it, Eleanor had written, Juliet renegotiated deliverables, preserved contract, maintained reputation. Actions logged, confirmed by CFO. On and on it went. Project by project, department by department. Every time Nathan promised and failed, Juliet stepped in and delivered. Every time he got the praise, she carried the responsibility. And Eleanor had documented all of it. Victoria handed copies to the board. These notes were verified against company records. Eleanor interviewed department heads, cross-referenced financials, and reviewed internal communications. She wasn't guessing. She was compiling evidence. Nathan looked like he might be sick. She was supposed to trust me, he muttered. She told me I had potential. She never denied your potential, Victoria replied. She simply concluded you hadn't fulfilled it. Dad stayed quiet. For once, the man who always had something to say was speechless. Victoria opened a laptop and played a video. It was Eleanor seated at her desk, composed and direct. If you're watching this, then my will has been contested, or at the very least, questioned. Let me clarify. My decision was not based on sentiment, favoritism, or tradition. It was based on observation. She looked into the camera like she was staring into our souls. I saw who fixed things when they broke. I saw who avoided responsibility. I saw who others turned to when they needed leadership, not authority, but guidance. And I made my choice accordingly. Nathan stood abruptly. This is insane. You're all going to let a dead woman decide the company's future? James Park, the CFO, finally spoke. No, we're letting the truth decide. Victoria paused the video. There's more. She opened another folder, this one thinner, but heavier in implication. Eleanor also commissioned an internal audit of Nathan's projections over the last 18 months. 3 independent consultants reviewed his plans. She handed out reports. I didn't need to look. I already knew. Every single one found the same issues: overestimated revenue, underestimated costs, lack of risk mitigation strategies. Eleanor called the projections dangerously optimistic. The board members read in silence, their faces grim. Juliet, on the other hand, Victoria continued, was cited by Eleanor in independent review as the company's de facto risk manager and chief strategist, regardless of title. That line echoed in the room. Not because it surprised them, but because it validated what they'd all seen for years. Margaret Chun, a senior board member, looked at me. You've been running this company the whole time, haven't you? I met her eyes, not officially, but yes. No one laughed. No one looked shocked, they just nodded. Victoria resumed the video. I chose Juliet because she has already led, quietly, competently, without recognition. That is real leadership. She ended with a pause and then a final statement. Give her the title. She's already earned the burden. The screen faded to black. And with it, the last illusion Nathan and my father had clung to vanished. Nathan paced the length of the boardroom like a caged animal. His cheeks flushed with frustration, the polished image cracking around the edges. Every few seconds, he'd mutter to himself or throw glances at me, ranging from disbelief to betrayal. He wasn't used to losing, especially not to me. This isn't over, he hissed. There's gotta be a loophole. A clause, something. There isn't, Victoria said firmly, already packing her briefcase. You think I'll work under her? Nathan turned to Dad. You're going to let her do this to me? Dad said nothing. His eyes were distant, fixed on a knot in the wood of the table. Nathan, I said calmly, this isn't something I did to you. It's something Grandmother saw. She didn't choose me to hurt you. She chose me to protect the company. But he wasn't listening. This is humiliation. After everything I've done, after everything I've been promised. You were promised based on who we thought you were, Victoria said, not unkindly. Eleanor based her decision on who you actually proved to be. He slammed his hand on the table. So I'm just supposed to take orders from her now? Yes, I said, starting with cleaning up the Henderson deliverables you misrepresented. The room froze. I'm not your assistant. You're not, I said, standing. You're director of business development, and right now you're failing at it. Silence followed. Then Dad finally spoke. I think we should all take some time, but it was too late for neutrality. He looked smaller now, like a man watching a castle crumble that he'd sworn was made of stone. When did you stop believing in me? Nathan asked him, voice cracking. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. It was Margaret Chun who answered. When we realized Juliet had been holding this place together while you took all the credit, Nathan stormed out, slamming the boardroom doors so hard the walls shuddered. The next morning, HR was flooded with resignations from 2 of Nathan's closest allies, both of whom had benefited from years of nepotism. I reviewed their files and signed the paperwork without emotion. We didn't need people who couldn't adapt to a merit-based system. Nathan didn't show up to work for a week. When he returned, he was quieter, defeated. He passed me in the hallway without a word. I didn't chase him. Dad, meanwhile, stayed away entirely. Rumors swirled that he was considering stepping down from the board. He didn't return my calls. Then, one afternoon, he appeared at my office door. His suit was perfectly pressed, but he looked older, tired. Juliet, he said. I motioned for him to sit. I don't expect forgiveness, he began. But I want to understand. For years, I said, you measured leadership by the wrong metrics. You saw charisma and called it competence. You saw caution and called it weakness. He didn't argue. That alone surprised me. I thought I was preparing Nathan, he said. All those lessons, all that pressure. I thought it would forge him. It didn't, I said. Because you ignored the one already forged, he nodded slowly. I underestimated you. I didn't reply. I want to fix that, he said. If you'll let me. Start by supporting the transition, I said, publicly. Stop pretending this was a surprise. His jaw clenched, but he nodded again. I can do that. That was the beginning of our reckoning. Not a reunion, not absolution, but a start. And for now, that was enough. The Monday following the announcement felt different. Not because I had suddenly changed, but because the world around me had. For the first time, when I walked through the halls of Bright Fern, people looked at me with something more than recognition. They looked at me with respect. It was in the way the junior analyst stood a little straighter as I passed. In the way the security guard nodded and said, "Morning, Miss Whitmore." It was subtle, quiet, but unmistakable. I wasn't the girl behind the curtain anymore. I was the one on the stage. My first act as CEO wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It was a closed-door meeting with every department head, no PowerPoints, no grand speeches, just a round table. I'm not here to pretend I've been waiting for this title. I told them, I've been doing the job for years. And now we're going to do it right, together. They didn't clap. But the energy in the room shifted. You could feel the shoulders relaxing, the guarded expression softening. Because they knew I meant it. My second act was more visible. I launched a full audit of current operations, starting with the departments that had suffered the most under Nathan's tenure. Marketing was overextended. Sales had outdated tools. Procurement was still tangled in contracts from Nathan's aggressive expansion years. We rolled up our sleeves. I didn't lead from the top, I led from within. I spent entire days shadowing team leads, joining strategy sessions, and holding listening tours. We created feedback loops that gave employees direct access to upper management. Then I brought in an external consultant, not to fix us, but to validate the internal recommendations my people were making. Within 2 quarters, we posted the strongest retention rates in company history. Morale was up, expenses were down. And no one, absolutely no one, missed the old regime. Nathan returned to work, technically reporting to me.
He sat in meetings, quiet and stiff, clearly uncomfortable with the shift in power. I treated him with professionalism.
I didn't rub it in, but I also didn't protect him anymore. When he submitted an overreaching proposal for a West Coast expansion, I flagged it in front of the board. These projections are not viable, I said. They're based on optimistic assumptions without proper market validation. We will not be moving forward. He turned red but said nothing. It was the first time he'd ever been publicly corrected. And the board didn't just accept it, they supported it. Because I'd earned that authority, not from inheritance. Not from charisma, but from action. Richard remained quiet for most of those early months. He attended meetings but didn't speak much. When he did, it was measured, careful. Eventually, he stopped calling me Juliet. He started calling me CEO. The day I signed off on our new 3-year strategic plan, I walked into my office to find a small envelope on my desk. It was a handwritten note from him. "You've proven what I failed to see. The company is yours. And it's in good hands." I didn't cry, but I did keep the note. It reminded me that some victories take years, some reckonings come too late. But recognition, when it finally arrives, matters. Especially when it's earned. Word travels fast in our industry. Within days of the succession announcement, the news hit the trades. Business Insider ran with "the quiet strategist who took down the golden boy." Other headlines followed. From spreadsheet to CEO, Juliet Whitmore rewrites the rules. A new era for Bright Fern. Leadership earned, not inherited. Calls began pouring in. Clients who had once politely tolerated Nathan's gloss now reached out with renewed interest. "I always thought you were the one holding it all together," said Melissa from the Henderson Group. "I knew," said Mr. Takeda from our Tokyo partners. "Every time we had questions, your answers saved us." Competitors were less kind to Nathan. Word got out that he had been bypassed by his own grandmother. Whispers turned to jokes. Investors began questioning how many deals Nathan had touched and how many Juliet had rescued. It didn't help that Nathan began applying elsewhere. 3 major firms contacted us during reference checks. Privately, I didn't sabotage him. Publicly, the record spoke for itself. By quarter's end, our stock was up 17%. Employee satisfaction hit an all-time high. We were profitable, but more importantly, we were trusted. I was invited to speak at a Women in Leadership panel. Then a corporate governance summit. At first I declined. I didn't do this for applause. But then I realized something. My story, our story, wasn't just about me. It was about every woman told she was good with details, every daughter asked to smile, while her brother was handed the crown. So I spoke, honestly, calmly, with data and stories and dignity. The response was overwhelming. LinkedIn blew up. Young women reached out. Executives asked for my model of performance documentation. I wasn't just fixing Bright Fern. I was rewriting what leadership looked like. And the industry finally was listening. The real aftermath was in public. It happened in the quiet spaces in hallways and kitchens, in text messages that went unanswered, and in phone calls returned days too late. It began with Nathan. He showed up at my office one Thursday evening, long after everyone had left.
He looked tired, deflated. "I need to talk," he said.
I nodded and gestured to the seat across from mine. He didn't sit. I messed it up, all of it. I waited. I was so focused on what I thought I deserved. I didn't see what you were actually doing. I folded my hands. And now? I see it. You didn't just fix my mistakes. You built the company I thought I was inheriting. He finally sat down. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, he said. But I'm asking, what do I do now? For the first time, his voice wasn't offensive.
It wasn't smug. It was human. I didn't rush to answer.
Start by doing the job, I said. Really doing it, learn, listen, take accountability. He nodded slowly. I don't hate you, he said. I don't hate you either, I said. But I won't protect you anymore. Fair. And just like that, something shifted, not healed, but shifting. Dad took longer. He didn't want to talk. For months, he kept things formal: board memos, shareholder updates, procedural language. Then, on what would have been Eleanor's birthday, he called. Dinner? I was stunned. Sure. We met at the old steakhouse he used to take Nathan to for father-son talks. The irony wasn't lost on me. He didn't waste time. She was right, he said. Mother. About you. I didn't say anything. I kept waiting for Nathan to become the man I thought he could be. I never stopped to see the woman you already were. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get, and it was enough. For now. We ate in silence for a while. Then he said, What are you going to do with all this? Lead, I said. Grow, protect what she built. What I've built. He raised his glass. To Eleanor, he said. I raised mine. To truth, it didn't happen overnight. Power, when earned rather than granted, comes quietly, like sunlight through blinds. Like the slow unfreezing of ground after a long winter. At first, people were cautious, unsure how long it would last, waiting for me to slip up. I didn't give them that chance. I met with every manager one-on-one. Not in my office, but in theirs. I listened before I spoke. I let them show me what worked, what didn't, what needed to be overhauled. We restructured 3 departments, not with layoffs, but with redefined goals, cleaner systems, and actual input from the people doing the work. Performance reviews shifted from top-down rankings to collaborative assessments. We introduced flexible hours for working parents. We created internal development programs to promote from within. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it worked. Bright Fern Holdings was no longer just surviving on legacy and name. We were evolving, and I was leading. The board's trust deepened. Our employees' loyalty grew. And I stopped hearing the phrase, supporting role. Clients began asking for me by name. Press requests multiplied. I said yes to the right ones. The ones that focused not on the drama, but on the philosophy, that leadership is service, not spectacle. At the year-end gala, we celebrated our strongest financial performance in a decade. When I stepped on stage to speak, the room fell completely silent. I looked around, at Nathan, at my father, at the board, at the employees who had once seen me as just the detail person. I used to think my job was to be invisible, I said. To make sure everything worked without being seen. But leadership isn't about being loud, it's about being clear. It's about showing up when it's hard. It's about standing up for what's right even when it's inconvenient. A standing ovation followed. But the real applause came the next morning, when 5 different department heads sent me messages that said the same thing. We're proud to follow you. I keep her letter in the top drawer of my desk. It's handwritten in Eleanor's crisp script, dated a week before her final visit to the office. Folded neatly, sealed with the same navy wax she used on family documents. I didn't open it right away. I found it after the transition had settled, buried under the final amendment paperwork in Victoria's packet. It wasn't legal. It wasn't formal. It was personal, Juliet. I know what this moment will feel like. I've sat in that chair. I've been the woman told to smile and support and let others lead. But I saw you long before you saw yourself. You are not just the detail person. You are the architect. You don't just support vision, you define it. They will say this was about fairness. It wasn't. It was about the future. And I trust you with ours. Be bold when others whisper. Be steady when others storm. And when you doubt yourself, remember this. Leadership isn't given. It's claimed. You've already claimed it. Now go lead. With all my love and pride, Eleanor, I cried the first time I read it. Not for the power, not even for the validation. For the clarity, she had seen what even I hadn't dared believe. Now every time I opened that drawer, I read the last line again. Now go lead, and I do, every day. Not out of revenge anymore, but out of purpose.